quote from The Gunning of America really got me. Gun politics today are consumed by Second Amendment controversies, but the Second Amendment did not design, invent, patent, mass produce, advertise, sell, market, and distribute guns. Yet the gun business, which did and does, is largely invisible in today's gun politics. The more I dive into this, the more I learn, the more I embrace my role as a scam historian, the more clear and depressing it becomes how so many aspects of what we consider our identities were planted, were shaped, were invented, were designed by capitalists. You look at something like the gun industry, which is like many industries, and there's a myth out there that the gun industry simply responded to a demand that already existed. But that's just not true, because yes, coming off of the Civil War and then World War I and so on, all these factories had grown and expanded to create weapons for the war efforts. And after the wars, they were in debt. They had all this operation and they needed to invent, to fabricate, to design a market of people who wanted guns, and not just a gun that they needed to use for utility, but lots and lots of guns, kind of like accessories. It makes me realize so many of our modern problems can be traced back to mass production and how demand had to be stimulated, invented, created, manufactured to keep the factory-owning capitalists on the up and up, to keep them rich. On this topic of identity, I remember back in the day an email that Ashley Albers of the Middle Finger Project sent out. She was talking about how she never really read the New York Times, but she was going to cancel her subscription to them, and she stopped because she wanted to be the kind of person who reads the New York Times. She wanted to be the kind of person that subscribes to the New York Times. So even if she didn't read it all the time, she was going to keep her subscription to maintain that part of her identity. And that right there is the crux of branding. It is about selling us the idea that if we buy this thing, it says something about us as people. And this extends to gun owners as well. Gun owners feel that when they buy guns, they are expressing themselves, their values, their identity as freedom-loving Americans. So yes, it is true that especially even before the Civil War, there was a demand for guns in the United States. People owned guns mostly because they were living on the land. They were using them for utility. People didn't own like 20 guns. They only owned as many guns as they needed in their everyday life. But what is so bleak and distressing about what the gun industry has done is they have co-opted that image of like the rugged frontiers person and used it to sell guns to everybody else. I mean, I was just talking to a gun owner and a gun advocate who was like, I think what people often miss is some people really use and need guns for their lives. They live in rural places. They use it for hunting and all of that kind of stuff. They use it to actually make and eat their own food. Yes. And yet what the gun industry has done has taken the image of that type of lifestyle and sold it to the masses, to everyone who wants to feel like they're a rugged frontiers person, but really they buy their food at the grocery store and they're binging Netflix. Is a gun really any different than a live, laugh, love sign? Why does somebody buy that sign and put it in their house? Because they want to say something about their values, like we're the kind of house that lives and laughs and loves. It's the same thing. This is the way that shopping in and of itself was sold, especially to women, as a form of self-care, as a hobby. And then it evolved into treat yourself culture, a la Parks and Rec. You know, I'm not above this. I buy things and put things in my home to reflect my sense of identity. So I think this is just a call to be critical and to analyze, what are you buying because you feel like, I mean, even the shirt, I bought it because I'm like, I live in Illinois. I don't even know. Am I proud to live here? I don't know. But I'm like, it says my state on it. What are you buying to affirm your own identity and sense of self? Back on my bullshit. In the early 20th century, when gun companies were arguing with the government about unregulated gun selling, they essentially threatened the government that if they couldn't market and sell guns to the civilian population without regulations, well, they wouldn't be able to make enough guns and weapons for wartime. So think about it. I gotta tell you, talking about guns, researching guns, not my area of interest, not my favorite thing to do, not my aesthetic. It's very bleak. It's very depressing. Yet what I am interested in is how our modern political debates have been shaped by marketing. And we are so disconnected from that. We think we came up with the ideas. If you remember any of my marketing muckrakings from earlier this year, I talked about how Louis Brandeis in the 1920s warned that with propaganda, would come a loss of critical thinking. In his perspective, linked to our freedom and happiness as individuals and as a greater culture. And so as I look at all of these debates around things like guns, things like abortion, I am noticing how so many of the talking points that many of us bring to the table have been shaped by either government or marketing propaganda. And we think we came up with the arguments. So if we want to go into a new direction, we need to know where we've been coming.
Should not be allowing this kind of disgusting marketing to go on another day.
The reason that it's so important that folks like the governor of California or Under the Desk News or Newsweek are shining a light on marketing guns to kids is because marketing is one of the only ways that gun manufacturers can be held accountable for their impact on rising gun violence. There was a $72 million Remington lawsuit that the Sandy Hook's victims' families won in February of this year. The families in Uvalde are mounting a legal case against Daniel Defense for their marketing to young people. Gun makers cannot be held responsible for what people do with their weapons except with their marketing. But one of the places that folks aren't looking, because they're looking at traditional ads like this with the cartoon skull and crossbones and AR-15s that are literally marketed to children, is they're not looking at how gun makers know this and they are pivoting their marketing to sponsor child influencers to sell guns to other kids. Why would gun companies market to children when children can't buy guns? Well, they're doing what the tobacco companies did in the 80s and 90s when they saw their demographic aging and they started targeting kids in their ads to prime them to become replacement smokers for the smokers who were dying or aging up, right? Same thing with the gun manufacturers. They are priming this market so that when a child turns 18, they have it already in their heads that they want to go out and buy a gun. That that's something that they want, right? They've got a nice, fresh new market of people who will continue buying guns in the future. Not to mention, the added benefit of if a kid thinks a gun is a fun thing, they're going to ask mom and dad for a rifle under the Christmas tree. That too, and I'll tell you what, when I was doing the research for my Newsweek article, I found literally endless videos with sentimental music of a child receiving their first gun under the Christmas tree, sometimes as young as 2 or 3 years old. Here's an example of one of the most popular gun tuber kidfluencers that I found. Her name is Autumn Fry. I believe that she's 8 years old. Her YouTube channel is full of videos like this, of her handling automatic weapons, sometimes with featured images that say super cute and things like that. And here's where it's hard to pin this down as traditional marketing. Sometimes she receives merch for free from gun companies and she chooses to promote them on her channel and she'll thank them, like Bear Creek Arsenal is one of her sponsors / benefactors. A lot of people said when they read my article that they don't see this marketing. And that's because you're not going to see this as a commercial on TV. You're not even going to necessarily see it as an ad because gun makers can't do Facebook ads or Instagram ads or traditional magazine ads targeting children. You're not going to see this unless you're in gun culture, unless you're watching these YouTube videos. This conversation around how troubling it is to see kids selling guns to other kids really opens up the greater issues around kids selling to kids in general, or parents using their kids to sell either to an adult audience or a mixed audience of children and adults. You know, in the entertainment industry, children can only work a certain amount of hours per day. Their money has to be accounted for in a certain way. That is just not true in the creator economy. That's not true with YouTube influencers. And I know you see it all the time. Parents who monetize their children. There's issues around privacy here. There's issues around money. There's so many things that we need to consider when it comes to monetizing our children and how few regulations exist around this. And I think that we're going to see a huge surge in kids and lawsuits fighting back against this as they're coming of age.